The first task, it seems, would be to offer an account of what paganism is that might help make sense of Eliot's references to modern paganism. With apologies, but for purposes of this lecture, I'm going to try to do this pretty summarily. So, for most people today, the term paganism probably elicits two main images. One is of capricious deities squabbling with each other on Mount Olympus and occasionally coming down to rescue some favored warrior or to consort with some especially fetching maiden. The other is of priests sacrificing bulls to Apollo or Zeus and guiding political decisions by studying the entrails of animals or the flights of birds. If this is what paganism is taken to mean, Eliot's diagnosis seems dead on arrival. No one of consequence today wants to return to that sort of thing. But must paganism be understood only in terms of these ancient stories and practices? Well, to address that question, it'll be helpful to begin with a broader category, religion. The term notoriously eludes definition, but for our purposes, religion can be understood in terms of two themes. One theme is the human need for meaning. The other is the human encounter with a reality often described as the sacred or the holy. So let me elaborate briefly. Growing out of his experience as a prisoner in the Nazi death camps, the psychologist Viktor Frankl argued that, quote, man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or to avoid pain, but rather to see a meaning in his life. In a similar vein, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks contends that we are meaning-seeking animals. It is what makes us unique. To be human is to ask the question, why? But what could provide that sort of meaning? Both Frankl and Sacks suggested that the answer ultimately lies in religion. Sacks quotes Wittgenstein. To believe in God means to understand the question about the meaning of life. To believe in God means to see that the facts of the world are not the end of the matter. To believe in God means to see that life has a meaning. Leaving for the moment that contention, though, and passing over some questions that occupy a large chunk of a chapter in the longer project, let me bring in the second theme, the human encounter with the sacred, or the holy. In his classic account, The Idea of the Holy, Rudolf Otto contended that the source of religion is the human experience of a transcendent reality, the holy. The holy is sui generis, Otto thought, not reducible into anything else. Even so, he tried to explicate the concept mainly through a series of imperfect analogies. So Otto discussed similarities between the experience of the holy and the sense of awe, the horror and shudder in ghost stories, as he said, the sense of the sublime, the feeling of the erotic, and the blissful rejoicing, as he put it, experienced when listening to beautiful music. In a similar vein, Mircea Eliade, in his influential book, The Sacred and the Profane, connected religion to a sense of the sacred. The sacred is the manifestation of something of a wholly different order, a reality that does not belong to our world. Though different, the meaning and sacredness accounts of religion seem compatible, even convergent. The sacred or the holy is what confers meaning on the world, as Sacks and Wittgenstein suggested. Without the luxury of lingering over some important questions here, though, we now need to ask a further question, leading to a key distinction. Where, so to speak, is the sacred? Where is it situated exactly? Simplifying, we might say that answers to that question have fallen into two main families. One answer, we can call it the immanent view, locates the sacred within nature or within the world. This was and is the pagan position. The pagan gods were, after all, often within this world. They were, as James O'Donnell explains, the mightiest part of the world itself, not beings that somehow stood outside it all. The other answer, the transcendent answer, asserts that the holy is ultimately a reality lying outside nature or beyond this world. Again, simplifying, we can say that this was and is the view of Judaism and Christianity. In this vein, Abraham Heschel contrasted ancient Greek religion with what he called biblical man. Greek religion identified the sublime with nature and with the world. In essence, it sacralized the world. By contrast, biblical man understood the sublime as a manifestation of something or someone who stood behind and above nature and the world. Augustine made the point in poetic terms. And what is this God that I love? He wrote in his Confessions. I asked the earth, and it said, I am not he, and everything in the earth made the same confession. I asked the sea, and the deeps and the creeping things, and they replied, we are not your God, seek above us. I asked the fleeting winds, and the whole air with its inhabitants answered, Anaximenes was deceived, I am not God. I asked the heavens, the sun, moon, and stars, and they answered, neither are we the gods whom you seek. And I replied to all these things which stand around the door of my flesh, you have told me about my God that you are not he, tell me something about him. And with a loud voice they all cried out, he made us. In light of this crucial distinction, we might say that paganism refers to a religious orientation that locates the sacred within this world. Historically, paganism has manifested itself in a dazzling variety of outward forms, but its essence lies in its immanent sacralizing tendency. Now, in this respect, I think I'm merely following a pattern of thought already evident in antiquity. Thus, in the 1st century BC, the scholar Marcus Varro distinguished among 3 forms of Roman religion: the mythical, the civic, and the philosophical. It was entirely possible to scoff at the mythical religion, as Varro himself did, along with many other educated Romans, and even to disdain the civic religion, the auspices, sacrifices, and so forth, as Seneca did, at least according to Augustine, while devoutly adhering to pagan religion in a philosophical sense. There are complicated questions here, but I'm suggesting that the philosophizing of Stoic and Neoplatonic pagans amounted to an effort to defend the sacralization of nature while abandoning at least literal belief in the pagan deities. And I note as well that something like this conception also seems to inform Yale law dean Anthony Kronman's massive spiritual philosophical tome published last year and reaching over 1,100 pages, entitled Confessions of a Born-Again Pagan. So let's take paganism as a label for immanent religiosity. And let's say that Christianity believes instead in a transcendent God, or perhaps more accurately, in a God who, though immanent and even incarnate, is also and ultimately transcendent. Scholars like the German Egyptologist Jan Assmann or the Israeli historian Guy Strumse suggest that the shift from the immanent religiosity of paganism to the transcendent religiosity of later Judaism and Christianity represented a kind of revolution with, as Strumse puts it, decisive consequences for the future of Western culture. As Strumse's observation suggests, the difference between immanent and transcendent religion wasn't merely theoretical. Rather, the different religiosities supported fundamentally different attitudes toward the world, different existential orientations, if you like. The polytheistic religion of antiquity, says Assmann, quote, seeks to make its votaries at home in the world. By contrast, the monotheistic Jew or Christian, quote, does not feel entirely at home in the world anymore. Christians were in the world, as the saying goes, but they aspired to be not of the world. And these different existential orientations have profoundly different practical implications. Let me briefly discuss 2 of these. And a subtitle for this next part of the lecture might be Sex in the City.